Hey everyone, this is Ronak Ahuja. I welcome you all again. Under the income taxes, we pay taxes on the profits or incomes that we earn during the financial year. Now, one big question that can come to anybody's mind is whether the government compensates us in case of losses we incur during the financial year. That is, whether the government directly pays us in case we incur a loss. I would say not directly, but indirectly for sure. So, in this video, we will be catering to all such questions of yours and help you understand what happens in case we incur a loss and how do we benefit from it indirectly. So, without wasting any further time, let's quickly begin. So, let's begin with set off and carry forward of losses. Let me explain this to you with the help of an example. Say, for example, a taxpayer earns during the financial year 2016-17 a profit of rupees 7,50,000. Then the taxable income of that taxpayer would be 7,50,000 and the taxes would be paid on this amount. Now, in the next year, that is during the financial year 2017-18, if the taxpayer earns a loss instead of profit of rupees 4,50,000, the question is, do we expect the government to pay us for these losses that we are incurring during the financial year 2017-18? The answer is no. But the government has a remedy for this. The government says you need to report this loss in your income tax return for the financial year 2017-18, and in case in future you earn any income, then in such a case these losses will be allowed to set off against the future profits. That is, you would be able to carry forward this loss of rupees 4,50,000 to future years, and when you earn any income in the future year, this loss will be allowed to be set off. This is called carry forwarding of losses. Say in the future you earn 8 lakhs and you have losses for the financial year 2017-18 to the tune of 4,50,000, then in such a case 4,50,000 would be reduced from 8 lakhs and the remaining 3,50,000 would be taxable. This is the indirect benefit that the government provides us. Now, moving on to the financial year 2018-19. In case we earn during the financial year 2018-19 a profit to the tune of rupees 3 lakhs, then in such a case, the losses that we had for financial year 17-18 will be allowed to be set off from this 3 lakhs. And the taxable income in that case would be 0, as because the entire loss has been set off against this entire profit. Now, one thing to note here is the entire losses of 2017-18 is not being adjusted against the income. That is, it is being adjusted only up to rupees 3 lakhs of profits for the financial year 2018-19. Now, what does this mean? This means that the balance losses, that is 4,50,000 minus 3 lakh, that is 1,50,000, will be carried forward to the next year, that is to the financial year 2019-20. Now, moving on to the financial year 19-20, in case we incur profits to the tune of rupees 5,20,000 during the financial year 2019-20, then in such a case the balance loss that we had with us will be reduced from this 5,20,000. The balance amount that remains after adjusting the loss would be our taxable income, and that is rupees 3,70,000. This adjusting of losses to the tune of 4,50,000 during the financial year 2018-19 and 19-20 is called setting off of losses with profits. So this is how the government provides us with the benefit in case we incur losses. I wouldn't say directly, but indirectly for sure. Now let's dig deeper into the setting off of losses. Setting off of losses can be of two types. The first is intra-head adjustment and the second is inter-head loss adjustment. Now what is intra-head loss adjustment? Where in case the losses are set off from the profits under the same head of income, that is, the losses are being incurred in, say for example, business head, and the profits from which it is being adjusted is also under the head business income, and such set off is made, then that type of set off is called a intra-head adjustment. In case of inter-head adjustment, where in case the losses are incurred by the taxpayer under one head of income and the same is set off from the profits of other heads of income, then in such a case, such type of adjustment is called an inter-head loss adjustment. Now let's understand these both with the help of an example. Say for example, Amar runs two businesses and he incurs a profit of rupees 5,75,000 in business X and incurs a loss of 2,26,500 in case of business Y. Then in such a case, both these businesses fall under the head income from business or profession. That is, they fall under the same head of income, which is the business or profession. Now, whenever we adjust this loss of business Y with the profits of business X, then in such a case, this type of loss adjustment would be called as intra-head adjustment. And the resultant figure would be the net profit that is taxable or offered to tax for that financial year. Now, what is inter-head adjustment? Say for example, Sonal runs a business and has incurred losses during the financial year to the tune of rupees 3,02,700 and also has an income under the head income from house property to the tune of rupees 5,40,000. Then in such a case, this situation is apt for explaining inter-head loss adjustment. She has an income or profit under the head income from house property to the tune of rupees 5,40,000 and has a loss under the head business income to the tune of 3,02,700. Now, when this loss of the business head is set off against the income of some other head, that is, income from house property, then in such a case, this type of loss adjustment is called inter-head loss adjustment. That is, loss of one head is being adjusted from the profits of some other head. This is the entire concept of inter-head loss adjustment. So, these are the two types of loss adjustments that are allowed under the provisions of the Income Tax Act: the intra-head loss adjustment and the inter-head loss adjustment. Now, one interesting thing to note is that these losses are allowed to be set off as per the underlying rules and conditions. That is, we need to satisfy the rules and the underlying conditions before any loss is set off from the profits of the year. Now, these rules are different for intra-head adjustments and different for inter-head adjustments. Let's move to the next segment where we discuss the underlying rules for each of the type of loss of adjustments. Underlying rules and conditions for set-off of losses under the same head, that is intra-head loss adjustment. All intra-head loss adjustments will be allowed to be made subject to the following conditions. This means all intra-head loss adjustments are allowed, only subject to the following conditions. Let's see. In case of business or profession, all the losses that have been incurred in case of a speculative business can only be set off against the profits of the speculative business. In case of losses incurred in respect of specified businesses, the same can only be set off against the profits of such specified business. However, losses from non-speculative business can be set off against the profits of the speculative business or the specified businesses. Moving on to income from capital gains. The long-term capital loss will be allowed to set off only with the profits of the long-term capital assets. That is, long-term capital losses can be set off only against the long-term capital gains. This means the short-term capital losses will be allowed to be set off from the long-term capital gains. Now, moving on to the third head of income, which is income from other sources, where in case any losses are incurred while owning and maintaining racehorses, then in such a case, such losses will only be allowed to be set off from the income which is earned from owning and maintenance of racehorses. That is, the losses while owning and maintaining racehorses will be allowed to be set off only against the profits from the same head of income. Moving on to the second one, where in case any incomes are earned from the lottery puzzle or crosswords or from online games, then in such a case, no losses from any heads or any source will be allowed to set off from such an income. That is, this income is a special income and will be taxed at special rates, and no losses will be allowed to be set off from such income. So these were the intra-head rules and conditions that need to be followed before we set off the losses from the profits within the same heads of income. Now let's move on to the inter-head loss adjustments and their underlying rules and conditions. Please note, in case of inter-head loss adjustments, the underlying rules and conditions will be discussed for each of the heads of income separately, that is, individually. So let's begin with the first head of income, that is, income from salaries. Any losses from house property would be allowed to be set off from the income of salaries subject to a maximum of rupees 2 lakhs during the financial year. Second one, any losses from the head's business or profession will not be allowed to be set off from the income from salaries, whether it's a speculative business income or a non-speculative business income. Moving on to the third one, any losses from the head's capital gains, whether it's a short-term capital loss or a long-term capital loss, will not be allowed to be set off from the income from salaries. Moving on to the fourth one, any losses from the head's other sources will be allowed to be set off from the income from salaries, provided such loss does not relate to owning and maintaining racehorses or from lotteries or crossword puzzles or online games. Moving on to the second head of income, incomes from house property. Any losses from non-speculative business income can be allowed to be set off from the income from house property. Second one, any losses from speculative business will not be allowed to be set off against the income from house property. Moving on to the third one, any losses from the capital gains, be it a short-term capital loss or a long-term capital loss, the same will not be allowed to be set off against the income from house property. Moving on to the fourth one, any losses from the head's other sources can be set off against the income from house property, provided it is not a loss from owning or maintaining of racehorses or from the lottery or crossword puzzle or from online games. These two types of incomes from other sources, that is losses from these sources, will not be allowed to be set off from the income from house property. Moving on to the third head of income, that is income from business or profession. Any losses of house property will be allowed to be set off against the income from business or profession, subject to a maximum of rupees 2 lakhs during a financial year. That too when the assessee opts for the old tax regime. This benefit will not be available to the assessee in case he or she opts for the new tax regime. Secondly, where in case any loss is incurred under the heads capital gains, that is, whether it's a short-term capital loss or a long-term capital loss, then in such a case, such a loss will not be allowed to be set off against the income from business or profession, whether it's an income under the head non-speculative business or income under the head speculative business. Both these incomes will not be allowed to be set off against the losses of the capital gains. Moving on to the third one, any losses from other sources will be allowed to be set off from the income from business or profession, provided the losses do not relate to the owning and maintenance of racehorse or from winnings of lottery or puzzles or online games. Moving on to the fourth one, that is income from capital gains. Any losses from the head's house property will be allowed to be set off from the income from capital gains, whether it's a short-term capital gain or a long-term capital gain, subject to a maximum of rupees 2 lakhs during a financial year. That too when the assessee owns or opts for old tax regime and not in case of new tax regime. Moving on to the second one, where in case any losses from non-speculative business income are there, such losses from non-speculative business income will be allowed to be set off against the income from capital gains, be it a short-term capital gain or a long-term capital gain. Any losses from speculative business will not be allowed to be set off from the income from capital gains. Moving on to the fourth one, any losses from other sources will be allowed to be set off against the income from capital gains, subject to the condition that the losses do not accrue to owning and maintaining of racehorses or losses from lotteries, crossword puzzles or online games. This adjustment will be allowed whether it's a short-term capital gain or in case of long-term capital gain. Irrespective of it, it shall be allowed in both the cases. Moving on to the last head of income, which is income from other sources. Any losses from the house property will be allowed to be set off against the income from other sources, subject to maximum of rupees 2 lakhs during the financial year. That too when the assessee opts for the old tax regime. Second, any losses from non-speculative business will also be allowed to be set off from the income from other sources. Third one, any losses from speculative business will not be allowed to be set off from the income from other sources. Fourth one, any losses from capital gains will also not be allowed to set off from the income from other sources. So these were some underlying rules and conditions for intra-head loss adjustment as well as the inter-head loss adjustment. So to summarize, we have created a separate summary sheet for both the intra-head and inter-head loss adjustment combined. You can take a snapshot of this and refer to it in the future. Now moving on to the next segment, that is carry forward of losses. Carry forward of losses, where in case an assessee incurs a loss during a financial year, such loss will be allowed to be carried forward and set off with the future year profits. But such losses can be carried forward only up to a certain period of time. This means the benefits of such losses can be availed only up to a specified period of time. beyond which such benefits lapse. So, let's quickly discuss the timeline of such losses. Any loss from house property can be carried forward to 8 years. Any loss from non-speculative business can be carried forward to 8 years. Any loss from speculative business can be carried forward up to 4 years. Any loss from specified business can be carried forward for an indefinite period of time. Any loss from the head's capital gains, that is a short-term capital loss or a long-term capital loss, the same can be carried forward to 8 years. For losses under the head other sources, that is losses from owning and maintenance race horses, will be allowed to be carried forward up to 4 years. Any unabsorbed depreciation from the business that is being carried out will be carried forward for an indefinite period of time. Now, one important thing to note in these cases is a business loss and a capital gain loss will be allowed to be carried forward instead of only if the returns are filed within the due date. Yes, this is the catch. In case you file the returns after the due date, then in such a case, capital losses and business losses will not allowed to be carried forward and will lapse then and there. Thus, it becomes very important to file your returns on time. Now, to discuss on the due dates for different assessees, a link has been shared in the comment section as we have discussed that in a separate video altogether. Please have a look at it as well. So, this is how the government provides us with the benefit in case we incur losses. In case you couldn't follow, please drop us a feedback in the comment section or mail us at talklevies@gmail.com. Thank you and stay tuned for more videos.